General Hospital. Charlotte's shocking confession shakes Port Charles as Rocco's fate takes a dramatic turn. The courtroom in Port Charles fell silent as a bombshell confession rocked the legal proceedings surrounding the Dalton lab break-in case. What everyone expected to be a straightforward trial against teenager Rocco Falconeri transformed into an extraordinary moment of sacrifice and truth when Charlotte Casadini made an unexpected decision that left the entire gallery in absolute shock. The lab break-in that started it all. The trouble began when three determined teenagers, Rocco, Danny Morgan, and Charlotte, decided to break into Professor Dalton's laboratory at the university. Their mission seemed noble enough. They wanted to gather evidence that Dalton was conducting illegal animal testing. What started as a quest for justice quickly spiraled into legal trouble that would threaten to destroy the lives of all three young people involved. Everything was going according to plan until Rocco heard the sound of approaching footsteps. Realizing that discovery was imminent and that Charlotte and Danny would be caught, Rocco made a split-second decision that changed everything. He intentionally made a noise to divert Professor Dalton's attention to himself, allowing his friends to escape into the darkness of the lab and slip away undetected. In that moment of bravery and selflessness, Rocco sacrificed his own safety for those he cared about. Dalton immediately confronted the young man and, enraged by the intrusion, dragged Rocco from the premises and demanded his arrest. While Charlotte and Danny managed to escape and ran to find their allies at Bobby's, Rocco faced the consequences alone. It seemed like the perfect setup. One teen would take the fall while the others walked free. But Port Charles had a way of complicating even the simplest situations. The charges mount against Rocco. As the case moved through the legal system, Professor Dalton didn't simply charge Rocco with breaking and entering. The vindictive academic stacked additional charges against the teenager, alleging that Rocco had destroyed proprietary information and damaged valuable research materials inside the lab. With each new accusation, Rocco's legal jeopardy grew exponentially worse. The stakes climbed higher with every hearing, and the possibility of serious consequences loomed over the young man's head like a dark cloud. Rocco's family scrambled to mount a defense. His parents, Dante and Lulu, worked tirelessly with their legal team to challenge the mounting charges. But the court proceedings moved relentlessly forward, and the evidence seemed stacked against the teenager who had only been trying to help expose what he believed to be criminal animal testing. The prosecution presented Dalton's accusations as fact, and it appeared that Rocco might face serious punishment for his supposed misdeeds. However, the truth was far more complicated than what appeared on the surface. While Rocco was the one caught and arrested, everyone in Port Charles who knew the situation understood one critical fact. Rocco wasn't the only person responsible for breaking into that lab. Danny Morgan and Charlotte Casadini had been equally involved in planning and executing the break-in. Yet for days, only Rocco faced the legal consequences for their collective action. The weight of guilt. As the trial progressed through the courtroom, the burden of guilt must have weighed heavily on both Charlotte and Danny. Day after day, they had to watch their friends suffer legal consequences for something they had all done together. They had escaped that night with only a close call, while Rocco remained trapped in a legal nightmare not entirely of his own making. Charlotte, a member of the powerful Casadini family, carried the knowledge that her family connections might spare her from the kinds of consequences that ordinary teenagers faced. Danny, meanwhile, already had a troubled history with law enforcement and understood that additional charges could devastate his future. As innocent bystanders in the courtroom gallery, both young people had to confront the moral weight of watching someone else bear the burden of shared responsibility. Charlotte's stunning confession. But then came the moment that shocked everyone. While the trial was in full swing, with legal arguments being made and evidence being presented, Charlotte made a stunning decision. The composed and sophisticated young woman stood up in court and made a confession that echoed through Port Charles like a thunderbolt. "I cannot sit here any longer and watch Rocco suffer for something we did together," Charlotte declared to the courtroom. Her voice was calm, but firm, carrying the weight of genuine conviction. The truth is, I was the one who planned this break-in. I was the mastermind. Rocco was trying to help his friend Emma, and Danny was trying to support both of us. I am the one who should be held accountable. The gallery erupted. Spectators exchanged shocked glances. Rocco's family members looked stunned. Even the judge appeared taken aback by this unexpected turn of events. Charlotte wasn't just admitting her involvement, she was claiming primary responsibility for the entire operation. She was voluntarily submitting herself to legal punishment in place of her friends. I knew the risks, Charlotte continued, her composure never wavering. I knew that we might be caught, but I also knew that 3 of us were involved. And I cannot accept a situation where only one person pays the price. I accept full responsibility for my actions, and I am prepared to face whatever legal consequences the court deems appropriate. The courtroom reaction. The confession created immediate chaos in the legal proceedings. Defense attorneys and prosecutors began animated discussions in hushed tones. The judge called for order in the courtroom as people struggled to process what had just happened. Rocco looked at Charlotte with an expression that mixed gratitude, shock, and concern all at once. His parents, Dante and Lulu, appeared both relieved for their son and worried about the implications of Charlotte's confession. Your Honor, Rocco's attorney quickly stated, this new testimony significantly changes the nature of these proceedings. We request that the charges against my client be reconsidered in light of this revelation. The prosecution, meanwhile, seemed caught off guard. They had built their case against Rocco, stacking charges based on Dalton's claims. But now, with Charlotte admitting to being the primary architect of the break-in, the legal landscape had shifted dramatically. The carefully constructed case against the teenager suddenly appeared less certain, less airtight. Danny Morgan sat silently in the gallery, watching the scene unfold before him. Like Rocco, he had been present at the break-in and shared equal responsibility for what had occurred. Yet in this moment, his friend Charlotte had stepped forward and taken the weight of accountability on her own shoulders. The complexity of what Charlotte had done, both noble and problematic, became immediately clear to everyone watching. The legal consequences. In the immediate aftermath of Charlotte's confession, the court system began to pivot. The charges against Rocco would likely be significantly reduced or possibly dismissed entirely. The prosecution would now have to rebuild their case against a defendant who was explicitly accepting responsibility and admitting to the charges. From a legal standpoint, Charlotte's confession had fundamentally altered the trajectory of the case. However, this also meant that Charlotte herself now faced serious legal trouble. By voluntarily admitting to being the mastermind behind the break-in, she had opened herself up to the full weight of criminal prosecution. The charges that had been piled onto Rocco could now be directed toward her. She would face the legal consequences of breaking and entering, property damage, and potentially other charges that Dalton and the prosecution might bring forward. The irony was bitter and complex. By trying to save Rocco from legal jeopardy, Charlotte had placed herself directly in the crosshairs of the justice system. The Casadini family fortune could certainly afford top legal representation, but money couldn't erase the fact that she had committed a crime and confessed to it publicly in open court. She would face real consequences for her actions, and unlike some defendants, she couldn't hide behind her family name or social status. A selfless act with heavy price. What Charlotte had done was simultaneously an act of profound selflessness and a personal sacrifice of enormous magnitude. She had been willing to face punishment to ensure that her friends wouldn't be unfairly burdened by the consequences. Yet this decision would alter the course of her own life in unpredictable ways. I would do it again, Charlotte said firmly when asked about her confession by reporters gathered outside the courthouse. Justice isn't served by allowing innocent people to take the fall for shared responsibility. Rocco was brave in trying to protect us that night, and I wasn't going to stand by and let him suffer alone. Her words captured something essential about the situation. 3 young people had each made brave choices in different moments, Rocco had bravely drawn Dalton's attention to himself to protect the others. Charlotte was now bravely accepting responsibility to protect Rocco, and Danny had made the choice to accompany his friends in their mission, understanding the risks involved. The unresolved question of Dalton's involvement. As the legal machinery shifted gears to focus on Charlotte's case, one critical element remained largely unexamined: Professor Dalton's own role in the situation. The prosecutor had built their case using Dalton as the primary witness and the victim whose property had been damaged. But questions lingered in Port Charles about what Dalton had actually been doing in that laboratory and why he had responded so aggressively to 3 teenagers who claimed to be investigating animal testing. Dalton had stacked charge upon charge against Rocco, seemingly intent on destroying the young man's future. Now that Charlotte had stepped forward, legal experts wondered whether Dalton would adjust his testimony or whether he would press forward with charges against the young woman. The situation remained fluid and unpredictable, typical of the drama that seemed to perpetually swirl through Port Charles. Conclusion: Port Charles adjusts to an unexpected turn. As the day concluded and the courtroom emptied, Port Charles was left to process what had happened. A trial that seemed destined to drag on for weeks had taken a dramatic turn. A teenager who had seemed destined for legal punishment would likely face minimal consequences. Another teenager had voluntarily stepped into the role of defendant, accepting responsibility and legal jeopardy to protect her friends. This is what justice should look like sometimes, one observer commented outside the courthouse. Not everyone playing the game, but someone actually standing up and accepting responsibility. Whether the justice system would treat Charlotte's noble confession with leniency, or whether her cooperation and admission would count in her favor, remained to be seen. But one thing was certain: Charlotte Casadin's surprising confession in that Port Charles courtroom had changed the trajectory of everyone involved. Rocco's path forward had been dramatically brightened. Danny's legal exposure had been significantly reduced, and Charlotte herself had chosen a path of personal sacrifice that would define her character in the eyes of Port Charles and determine the consequences she would face moving forward. The drama surrounding the Dalton lab break-in was far from over, but this unexpected confession had marked a turning point, a moment when someone chose to do what she believed was right, regardless of the personal cost. Next, we will learn about the issue that has captivated Port Charles residents and General Hospital viewers alike for several long months: the mysterious shooting of Drew Kane and the stunning possibility that mayoral candidate Ezra Bole could be the mastermind behind this calculated attack. As the mayoral race reaches its explosive conclusion this week, the pieces of this intricate puzzle are finally beginning to fall into place, revealing a web of deception, political ambition, and dangerous alliances that could reshape the power dynamics of Port Charles forever. The long-awaited revelation. For what feels like an eternity, General Hospital fans have been glued to their screens, desperately seeking answers about who pulled the trigger on Drew Kane, the ambitious and controversial city councilman whose near-fatal shooting sent shockwaves through the entire community. The ABC soap opera has masterfully strung viewers along with red herrings, false leads, and carefully planted clues that have kept speculation running wild across social media platforms and fan forums. Now, as we approach what could be the climactic revelation of this mystery, one name keeps emerging from the shadows, a name that almost no one saw coming until very recently: Ezra Bole, the charismatic mayoral candidate who has positioned himself as Port Charles's next great leader. The timing of Ezra's sudden return to our screens after weeks of unexplained absence cannot be mere coincidence. While his campaign activities have provided a convenient excuse for his sporadic appearances, savvy soap opera enthusiasts know that when a character disappears during a major mystery arc only to resurface at a crucial moment, they are often intimately connected to the central crime. Ezra first burst onto the Port Charles scene back in March of this year, introducing himself as a fresh political voice ready to challenge the established order represented by the beloved Mayor Laura Collins. His charm, his vision for the city's future, and his seemingly genuine desire to serve the public good quickly won over many Port Charles citizens. But beneath that polished exterior, could a ruthless criminal mastermind have been hiding all along? The least likely suspect. What makes Ezra Bole such a fascinating potential culprit is precisely the fact that he seems so utterly unlikely to have committed this crime. Any dedicated soap opera aficionado will immediately recognize the classic mystery formula at play here. The person who ultimately committed the heinous act is invariably the individual whom viewers spent the least amount of time suspecting. Throughout this entire investigation, General Hospital has methodically directed suspicion toward numerous Port Charles residents with obvious motives and opportunities, carefully ensuring that Ezra remained completely off the radar of both the Port Charles Police Department and the viewing audience. This masterful misdirection is the hallmark of superior soap opera storytelling, and it suggests that the writers have been setting up this revelation from the very beginning. The relationship between Ezra and Drew adds another fascinating layer to this potential betrayal. These two men are not strangers or casual acquaintances, they are friends, political allies, and co-conspirators in an ambitious scheme to fundamentally transform Port Charles's power structure. Drew has invested considerable time, energy, and political capital into ensuring that Ezra wins the mayoral election, viewing him as the perfect puppet who will do his bidding once installed in the mayor's office. Their public displays of mutual support and shared vision have been nothing short of convincing, which is precisely why the revelation that Ezra shot Drew would be so utterly devastating and shocking. The betrayal would cut deeper than any bullet ever could, destroying not just a political alliance, but a personal friendship built on what Drew believed was mutual trust and shared goals. The diabolical alliance. To fully understand why Ezra might have turned on Drew, we must examine the complex web of alliances and schemes that these men have woven together. Drew's ultimate objective has been crystal clear from the beginning. He wants to completely obliterate Sonny Corinthos, the powerful mob boss who has dominated Port Charles's criminal underworld for decades. To accomplish this monumental task, Drew has carefully assembled a coalition of allies who share his vision of a Sonny-free Port Charles. Ezra represents the political arm of this operation, the respectable public face who will provide legal cover and institutional support for their activities once he assumes the mayor's office. Together, they envision a Port Charles where Sonny's influence has been completely eradicated and new power brokers have taken control. But Drew and Ezra are not working alone in this audacious scheme. They have forged a dangerous alliance with Jen Sidwell, a ruthless international criminal whose reputation for violence and strategic thinking precedes him wherever he goes. Sidwell brings resources, connections, and a level of cold-blooded ruthlessness that neither Drew nor Ezra could match on their own. The triumvirate has developed elaborate plans to seize control of Sonny's valuable peer operations, which serve as the cornerstone of his business empire and provide him with both legitimate income and cover for his less legal activities. By taking control of these strategic assets, they believe they can cripple Sonny financially and operationally, leaving him vulnerable to complete destruction. The first critical step in this master plan is removing Laura Collins from the mayor's office. Laura, with her integrity, her deep connections to the community, and her unwavering commitment to law and order, represents an insurmountable obstacle to their schemes. She would never knowingly allow criminal enterprises to operate with impunity or permit the kind of under-the-table dealings that Drew, Ezra, and Sidwell's plans require. Therefore, she must be defeated in the election and replaced with someone they can control, namely Ezra Bole. Once Ezra sits in the mayor's chair, he can quietly reshape city policies, redirect police resources, and create the regulatory environment that Drew and Sidwell need to execute the next phases of their operation, the alibi that could unravel everything. As investigators have worked tirelessly to identify Drew's shooter, one piece of evidence has consistently protected certain suspects from serious scrutiny: alibis. Michael Corinthos, Sonny's son and someone with his own complicated relationship with Drew, has maintained that he was nowhere near the shooting scene because he was otherwise occupied with Jacinda Bracken, a sophisticated escort who moves through Port Charles's elite circles with practiced ease. Jacinda has corroborated Michael's story, providing him with what appeared to be an airtight alibi that completely removed him from the suspect list. However, recent developments suggest that this alibi may be nothing more than an elaborate house of cards waiting to collapse. Whispers and rumors have begun circulating through Port Charles suggesting that Jacinda was not actually with Michael during the critical time frame when Drew was shot. If this is true, then Michael's alibi disintegrates, immediately placing him back at the top of the suspect list and exposing him to potential arrest and prosecution. But the story becomes even more intriguing when we consider who Jacinda might have actually been with during those crucial moments. Multiple sources are now pointing toward a stunning possibility. Jacinda was entertaining another client that evening, and that client was none other than Ezra Bole himself. This revelation would have absolutely catastrophic implications for Ezra's mayoral campaign. In the conservative political environment of Port Charles, the disclosure that a mayoral candidate was patronizing an escort service would likely spell the end of his political ambitions. Voters tend to be unforgiving of such scandals, particularly when they involve individuals who have positioned themselves as moral leaders and champions of family values. Ezra has carefully cultivated an image of respectability and ethical leadership throughout his campaign, and this scandal would utterly destroy that carefully constructed facade in an instant. Detective Chase closes in. Detective Harrison Chase, one of Port Charles Police Department's most dedicated and talented investigators, is apparently closing in on the evidence that will expose this entire scheme. General Hospital spoilers indicate that Chase will obtain definitive proof of Ezra's involvement with Jacinda at some point this week, setting off a chain reaction of revelations and confrontations that will shake Port Charles to its core. Chase has built his reputation on his unwavering commitment to justice and his remarkable ability to see connections that other investigators miss. His dogged pursuit of the truth in this case suggests that he has sensed something amiss with the official narrative and has continued investigating even when others might have been satisfied with the existing evidence. When Chase presents his findings, the immediate and obvious consequence will be the destruction of Michael Corinthus's alibi. Michael will suddenly find himself exposed and vulnerable, facing intense scrutiny from both law enforcement and the public. However, for Ezra, the situation may be even more precarious. On the surface, he will likely present himself as mortified and devastated that this deeply personal and embarrassing information has surfaced at such a critical moment just days or even hours before voters head to the polls. He will probably issue tearful apologies, express profound regret for his poor judgment, and possibly even consider withdrawing from the race, depending on how the scandal unfolds. But what if this public display of shame and embarrassment is nothing more than masterful acting? What if Ezra anticipated this exact scenario and has actually been orchestrating events to unfold precisely this way? Soap opera villains are renowned for their ability to think several moves ahead, creating situations that appear to harm their interests but actually serve their deeper strategic objectives. Could this scandal have been part of Ezra's plan all along? The master plan revealed. Consider this possibility. Ezra Bole shot Drew Kane himself. His motive could have emerged from numerous sources. Perhaps Jen Sidwell, growing increasingly paranoid about operational security, identified Drew as a potential liability, someone whose high profile and reckless behavior made him a danger to the entire operation. Sidwell may have ordered Ezra to eliminate this problem, presenting it not as a request, but as a command that could not be refused without severe consequences. Alternatively, Ezra may have reached his own conclusions about Drew's usefulness. Perhaps he grew tired of Drew's ego, his demands, his constant need to be the center of attention. Maybe Ezra realized that Drew's drama and impulsiveness made him more of a burden than an asset, and decided that the partnership needed to be permanently dissolved. Regardless of his specific motivation, Ezra would have approached this murder plot with the same meticulous planning and strategic thinking that he applies to his political campaigns. He would have known that simply shooting Drew and fleeing would eventually lead investigators back to him, so he needed to construct an alibi, but not just any alibi. He needed one that would serve multiple purposes and position him perfectly for whatever developments might follow. Here is where Ezra's brilliance truly shines. Immediately after shooting Drew, he contacted Jacinda Bracken and arranged for her to come to his hotel room. This accomplished several objectives simultaneously. First, it provided him with a witness who could testify to his whereabouts during the shooting in escort who, for professional reasons, would be disinclined to discuss her clients with authorities unless absolutely forced to do so. Second, it created the exact scandal that is now emerging, which Ezra may have calculated would actually help him in the long run. How? By making him appear human, flawed, and vulnerable, potentially generating a sympathy vote from citizens who appreciate his honesty about his mistakes. Third, and most cunningly, it provided cover for Michael Corinthos by establishing that Jacinda was occupied during the shooting, giving Michael an alibi that would later be proven false, thereby directing suspicion toward Michael and away from Ezra himself. November Sweeps brings shocking revelations. General Hospital fans know that November Sweeps represents the soap opera's annual period of maximum drama, shocking plot twists, and game-changing revelations. This is when the writers pull out all the stops, delivering the moments that will keep audiences talking for months and ensure that viewers remain glued to their screens through the holiday season. The tradition of November Sweeps demands that secrets, which have been carefully guarded for months, finally come to light. Relationships are shattered by betrayals, and the status quo is completely upended in ways that no one could have anticipated. Given this tradition, there is an excellent chance that viewers will soon learn the truth about Ezra being Drew's shooter, but here is where the storytelling becomes truly diabolical. The revelation may come to the audience while remaining hidden from the characters within the show itself. We, as viewers, might be given the privilege of knowing exactly what Ezra did and why he did it, even as every single person in Port Charles remains completely in the dark about his guilt. This creates an exquisite dramatic tension as we watch Ezra continue his campaign, interact with unsuspecting citizens, and possibly even attend Drew's hospital bedside to offer false expressions of concern and support all while we know the terrible truth. The ultimate nightmare scenario, and the twist that would generate maximum dramatic impact, would be for Ezra to actually win the mayoral election despite everything. Imagine the horror of watching this calculated murderer take the oath of office, assume the powers and responsibilities of Port Charles's highest elected position, and begin implementing the very agenda that led him to shoot his supposed friend in the first place. He would have achieved the perfect crime, eliminating a liability, securing political power, and positioning himself to complete the destruction of Sonny Corinthos while the entire city celebrates his victory and looks to him as their new leader. The implications for Port Charles. If Ezra Bole is indeed revealed as Drew Kane's shooter and subsequently becomes mayor, the implications for Port Charles would be staggering. The city would be led by an individual who has demonstrated a willingness to murder his own allies when they become inconvenient. Laura Collins, Jason Morgan, Sonny Corinthos, and all of the other forces for stability in Port Charles would find themselves fighting against an enemy who holds institutional power and can manipulate the levers of government to protect himself and advance his agenda. The police department, theoretically under the mayor's oversight, would face enormous pressure to drop the investigation or redirect it toward innocent parties. Chase and other honest cops would have to navigate a minefield of political interference as they tried to bring the real criminal to justice. Meanwhile, Jen Sidwell would gain exactly what he wanted: a corrupt mayor who will facilitate his criminal enterprises and help him seize control of Sonny's peer operations. The partnership between Sidwell and Mayor Bole would represent an existential threat to everything that Port Charles's heroes have fought to protect. This is not merely a storyline about solving a shooting, it is about the battle for Port Charles's soul and determining what kind of city it will become in the years ahead. The coming days promise to deliver some of the most explosive and consequential moments in recent General Hospital history. Whether Ezra's guilt is exposed before the election, revealed afterward to set up a corruption storyline, or kept hidden even longer to build maximum suspense, this plot thread has the potential to reshape the show's landscape for months or even years to come. Fans should keep their eyes glued to every scene, every conversation, and every meaningful glance, because the truth about who shot Drew Kane and why may finally be within reach.